So these are all different ways of just claiming our faith has no absolute truths, no correct interpretation, and you can tailor it to suit yourself. That's all these do. They say there's no absolute truth, there's no correct interpretation, and you can tailor the faith to suit yourself. When you tailor the faith to suit yourself, that's relativism. There's no, because you've eliminated truth, you know, eliminated the absolute standard, eliminated the correct interpretation. Now, again, don't confuse with there being a correct interpretation with our inability to know it 100% correct. There's a difference between absolute truth existing, yes, it does, and there's not absolute certainty, as I explained earlier. If it's true that our interpretations are never mistaken, then why do we even need the Imam to interpret the faith for us? You know, just decide what you think, and that's done. You're done with it. Again, coming back to this quote, Imam Mansour didn't say use your opinions. There are no wrong answers. He says get evidence, which means there is a right and wrong answer. Now, you may not know it completely, but you got to have that commitment. Then you can say, well, it's the best I know. And our Imams do say our interpretations can be mistaken. They don't say that there's no wrong interpretations. You know, freedom of interpretation does not mean freedom from truth. Both Maulana Aslam and Shah Hazram say your interpretations of faith can be mistaken. Maulana Hazram in 2003 UK at the IAS, he said, this freedom of interpretation is a generosity which the Quran offers upon all believers, uniting them in the conviction that the all merciful Allah will forgive them if they err in their sincere attempts to understand his word. So obviously they can err, which is make a mistake. They can have a false, wrong interpretation. Okay, so let's see how relativism now plays in religious tenets and religious education. Of course, as a faith community, that's really important for us, and it should be, because our whole premise is based on God being there. But how can, at the same time, we have an idea of God being there, setting absolute standards, and at the same time, the faith and any religious community have the idea? How can faith come in and corrupt that? So how does it creep into faith? And not only our faith, it's all faiths. It's similar variations on all of this. Well, what happens is you end up with faith and education. It creeps into faith and education through what I call virtuous faith claims like this. They sound very virtuous. They sound very reasonable, because that's what relativism plays on. Oh, this sounds reasonable. It certainly sounds reasonable. Yes, you're entitled to your opinion. Yes, so there is your truth. You know, it doesn't sound very bad. It sounds very, that's what I said, it's just sweet words. So, for example, you hear all the time, there are no wrong interpretations. You know, you're free to make your own interpretation. Allah said you can make your own interpretation. There are no black and white answers. You know, everything is gray, and there's some things are gray, but there are some black and white answers. There's no black and white answers. There are no answers. Sometimes you ask a question, or they'll say you must find your own answer, or you're on your own personal search. Well, Hazram said, you know, we're searching for something, but he said for himself, he's searching for the truth. Of course, by the Nur, he has that, but in a material sense, that's what he said. So you can't have truth if you're on your own personal search for what? Just decide what truth is and whatever it is. Yes, you are on a search, but search for what? Doesn't mean there's no right or wrong answer. The search is for the right answer as best as we can get it. It'll only be to your level of intellectual satisfaction, because it would never be absolute. And then there's this idea of your truth and my truth, and that comes in with faith, saying, yes, it's your truth, and that's fine if you want to believe that. And you are entitled to believe that. The question is, you should then try and check you're not making a mistake, because that's how you will have humility. That's how you will get an aha moment. You can't have this aha moment, which is the truth, the grace from God, until you think for what yourself and take your opinion and then look at it and see if it is true or not. Then you'll find out, oh, it actually is, and here's why. It's really remarkable, and you get that aha moment. God can't grant you that aha moment, which is truth, because you can't share the truth, as I've said. You can share the evidence, you can discuss it, and hopefully you'll get this insight and pops into your head like a light bulb. Well, that's grace from God giving you insight. Okay, so you can't have that unless you're thinking for yourself, willing to say you're wrong. There's no such thing as your truth and my truth. It's the truth, which God will grant you if he chooses the grace to understand it. So your truth and my truth are just opinions. They sound very virtuous, again, sweet words, sounds very reasonable. No, we have a word for that. It's called an opinion. Okay, truth is not your truth and my truth. It's truth. It doesn't have versions of it. Or you can say true for you, but not for me. Again, that's 100% relativism. It's the same idea. We have our own lived experiences. And yes, we have our lived experiences, but they're not truth. Okay. or you hear this, I'm spiritual but not religious. But what does that mean? If you're not religious, you haven't got God, you haven't got a baseline. You're just on your own opinion, found your own New Age faith, for example, or whatever you found that sounds gives you emotional satisfaction. That's fine, but that's why we have an intellect too. That's why I said there's two sides. I think of it as a saying from Hazrat Ali saying something along the lines, I can't remember exactly, but saying that, God will not accept blind faith without intellect, or vice versa, something along those lines. The two interplay with each other. So certain things you have to take on faith because you can't verify everything. But let's take your source where you're getting that from, that particular thing you can't verify. Let's verify that at least. So when there's some things that source will tell you, the Imam, God, whoever, the Quran, if you can verify that source, then you can rely on that source to say, okay, it's told me something. I don't understand why it's true, but I'll believe it because the source I verified is true. Some things you may understand. Some things you may want to spend a lot of time and investigate because they just catch your fancy and you got a question there. You want to really dig deeper into that, and that's fine. Hazrat Ali said, don't try and study everything, only study what interests you, because there's no time to study everything. Knowledge is infinite, because Allah is infinite. So these are all different ways of just claiming our faith has no absolute truths, no correct interpretation, and you can tailor it to suit yourself. That's all these do. They say there's no absolute truth, there's no correct interpretation, and you can tailor the faith to suit yourself. When you tailor the faith to suit yourself, that's relativism. There's no, because you've eliminated truth, eliminated the absolute standard, eliminated the correct interpretation. Now, again, don't confuse with there being a correct interpretation with our inability to know it 100% correct. There's a difference between absolute truth existing, yes, it does, and there's not absolute certainty, as I explained earlier. What people do is say, oh, we can never know the truth, so we can do what we want. No, no, that doesn't follow. There is an absolute truth. If you want to say there's no absolute truth, please go ahead and show me that evidence. And the moment you do, you've now proven an absolute truth. So that's why it makes no sense. It's not logically consistent. In the Quran, Allah says, and there's one verse where he says, we've created everything in truth. In truth means with this remarkable concept that if there's no truth, there's nothing left. There's nothing left. It's in truth. It permeates everything. It's part of the entire. That's why the intellect is part of the whole process here. You can't remove it. Truth is the way by means we get to the intellect and experience it, the aha moment. Now, since you can never be mistaken, because they're saying right now there are no black and white answers, there are no wrong interpretations and so forth, redemption, accountability are all irrelevant and moot. You're never wrong, so you don't need to be humble. You don't have to forgive anyone else for doing anything. Forgive anybody is not, you don't need forgiveness because you're not wrong. You haven't made a mistake. You don't need redemption now because, again, you haven't made a mistake. All of those come in from redemption. All of this is redemption, forgiveness, humility, all accountability, all from the point of view that we're human and we make mistakes. But if there are no wrong interpretations, there's no mistake to be had. So we don't need all of that. So it doesn't make any sense. Judgment's not needed either, because you just tell God, well, there were no wrong interpretations. So why are you being harsh on me? And, we can ask, again, a little bit of a facetious question to really drive this home, because sometimes you need to do that. Even the Quran sometimes is sarcastic to drive a point home, like that quote I gave at the beginning. It says, how do you judge? If it's true that our interpretations are never mistaken, then why do we even need the Imam to interpret the faith for us? Just decide what you think, and that's done. You're done with it. Again, coming back to this quote, Imam Mansour didn't say use your opinions. There are no wrong answers. He says get evidence, which means there is a right and wrong answer. Now, you may not know it completely, but you got to have that commitment. Then you can say, well, it's the best I know. Just the mere fact of saying this is the best I know is humble in itself. But if there's just opinions and there's no wrong or right answer, you don't have to even say this is the best I know. I know this, and that's good enough for me. You turn yourself into God. God's irrelevant. So our Imams actually say ask questions and get answers, not that there are no answers, for example, which is one of the answers you will sometimes get. I want you to be able to understand your religion, and if there are any questions, do not hesitate to ask. Now, why did he say this? Why do you think to ask the question? He said it's much better to ask and receive an answer than to have a feeling of frustration inside you. This is a very, very interesting point here. His measure of the answer is to remove your frustration. He didn't say the answer must give you the truth. Okay. And what removes your frustration may be different from my frustration. Now, that may seem relativism, but it's not. You need to get an answer intellectually satisfying to you, which makes sense to you intellectually. And that's why I was talking about this idea of intellectual satisfaction, because this is about giving you certainty. And now tomorrow morning, you may wake up and say, well, that doesn't make any sense, because you realize something and you want now a better answer. And so what satisfied you yesterday may not satisfy tomorrow. And that's why we're in a constant search, because we will not have absolute certainty. And one day something will wake up and we'll wake up and say, well, that was right, but except I didn't think about this. That doesn't make sense now. So I need to rethink about that and go back again. That's where the humility and the search and everything starts to flow, like I showed yesterday. He said, you cannot give a child secular education and then expect him not to ask questions about his religion. So right there, Hazram said, yeah, let him ask questions, bring it on kind of thing. I'm not worried about it. I've got God in my back pocket is what he's saying. I've got no problem with that. I expect you to get answers and ask questions from their secular education, which happens all the time. We see this every day. This is 57, he's saying this. The other one was in 59, the earlier quote. Imam Jafar Sadiq said, verily, this knowledge of religion is under lock, and the keys to which are questions. Well, obviously, it's expecting you to get an answer. And all of these questions, all of these demands the Imams say to ask questions is, to get an answer, not to ask the question and say no answers, or there's no black and white answers, or whatever you feel is fine. For example, again, to bring it to the ridiculous, when the people asked the Prophet a faith-related question, do you think he answered whatever you feel is fine? Now, would that increase or decrease your feeling of frustration? Remember, at the beginning, Hazram said the whole point of getting the answer is to remove your frustration, not increase it. Then you wonder, well, again, what's the Prophet there for if whatever I think is fine? And our Imams do say our interpretations can be mistaken. They don't say that there's no wrong interpretations. Freedom of interpretation does not mean freedom from truth. There's a very different concept here. You're free to interpret, but doesn't mean you're free from the truth. You're free to interpret, and then you're supposed to go and check. That's the whole point of having the freedom and the choice, is to bring in the humility and the thinking and then removing the blind faith aspect of it. Otherwise, if you're not going to check, you've detached yourself from truth. It doesn't matter to you anymore. That's relativism. Both Maulana Aslam Shah and Hazram say your interpretations of faith can be mistaken. Maulana Hazram in 2003 UK at the IAS, he said, this freedom of interpretation is a generosity which the Quran offers upon all believers, uniting them in the conviction that the all merciful Allah will forgive them if they err in their sincere attempts to understand his word. So obviously they can err, which is make a mistake. They can have a false, wrong interpretation, and we're hoping he will forgive us, and that's what binds all Muslims together. Now, remarkably, Maulana Hazrat Shah said exactly the same thing in his book, in the Memoirs, in chapter 2. And you studied this book in this platform in detail just recently. So in chapter 2, in one version, it's chapter 8, in the other version, it's the chapter on his faith, religion of my ancestors. The Quran is constantly open to allegorical interpretation, the same as what Hazram said. And all schools of thought unite in the prayer that the Almighty in his infinite mercy may forgive any mistaken interpretation of faith whose cause is ignorance or misunderstanding. In other words, exactly what Hazram said. We all, the Muslims, pray for forgiveness. We can be mistaken for a misinterpretation of faith due to ignorance or misunderstanding. A sincere attempt was tried, but it was not an unfaithful or it was done in good faith, so in attempt to understand what Hazram said, or the Imams had said, or the Quran. In another farman, Hazram Shah said, the essence of religion is to abandon false conceptions. Now, false means wrong. And he said that's the essence of it, because that's the humility part, because you have to say, I am wrong. You have to be doing the checking. That's the entire faith right there. And that's why he calls it the essence. I mean, this line here is my entire presentation finished. I don't need to say anything further if you understand that one line right there. The whole point of intellect, humility, absolute standard, because how are you going to judge an absolute standard unless false what's false, unless you have an absolute standard? And notice he said it's not to get the truth, because we never will get the truth. It's a continuous removing of false ideas. It's a continuous process of removing what's wrong, trying to get to better certainty, because you're always in this state of not having absolute certainty. So there's always something wrong, and that's your continuous process. You will never get to the truth. You're always in a state of some level of uncertainty and falsehood, because you're human. That's the essence of religion, to do the search and to find them. Again, that's the search right there. To abandon them, well, you better have to go look for them first. Imam Bakr said, verily a person may single out any verse from the Quran and interpret it wrongly and may fall down deeper than the distance between heaven and earth. Just one verse you go wrong, and that's it. If you interpret one verse wrong, you've lost everything. And, for example, if we take the idea that there are no wrong answers, that alone will completely, that's it. There's nothing left at that point. You've basically fallen deeper than the distance of heaven and earth, because you're not even on the path of what the truth, what the faith says. So again, right back from Imam Bakr, and if you can find this from the Prophet, I could put any number of these up. I can keep on going, but obviously I can't put 20 up here and everyone will get bored. But you can find this repeated over and over and over again. And the reason for this is because our faith is grounded in truth. 2 + 2 is 4. So everything will make perfect sense. If you say 2 + 2 is 5, which is relativism try to say it's not, there's no such thing as true. There's an infinite number of reasons you can keep on dismantling it. You can bring any number of these to keep on showing that's wrong, it's wrong, it's wrong. Our Imams say the same thing in the same things in different ways, over and over and over again. All of these say the same thing. Any one of these are my entire presentation. Pick one quote and that's the entire presentation done. I don't need to say anything more. So let's see how that plays out in the diagram, see how relativism plays out. Well, if you're starting with the idea of there's my truth, your truth, this is what I feel, that's just your opinion, that comes from the idea there's no logic and reason. Logic and reason are not needed and abandoned. And that comes from the idea of everything is an opinion. And that's what this whole idea of faith is. No wrong answers. You're entitled to your truth, my truth. There's no right or wrong answers. This is everything's an opinion. When the Imam said, no, everything's not an opinion. Hopefully Allah will forgive us when we're mistaken because we did our best efforts. So that whole area comes again from no value judgments, no absolutes. And although you're religious, you're actually not, from a certain point of view, you can say you can believe in God, but at the same time, you've removed absolute truth. So you can't have God and no absolute truth. And this is where it comes to that point where I was saying people want to have God's values without the value judgments, because if you remove one of these, you remove all of them. So, not that I'm saying those people are not religious, it's for God to decide, but you can't have one without the other. And you have to remove the absolute truth. So that's the big role here. That's why it's in purple up here on the top here, the breakdown. That's the one really in play here. From there, it goes through no right or wrong, more rather than the other two. Like I said, when you shuffle these around, you get different things that are important. You come to everything's an opinion, again, no accountability and so forth. And you come down into no logic, and then you come to your truth. That's also part of the breakdown of common sense. And it's a breakdown of all religious values, because humility is redundant now. So faith is whatever you decide. All faith interpretations are correct. None can be mistaken. And Hazram has said, on one quote here, the one I just made about, we hope Allah will forgive us if we make our mistakes. And then back to these same ones on having your own facts, and everything breaks down once intelligence goes. So that's how relativism plays out. It's coming right back to this core view here. There are no absolute truths. You can't have that with no God. That's a contradiction in terms, but that's exactly what relativism does. It makes contradictions.